I go back and I rewatch that press conference very, very regularly. Why? Well, because I think it's one of the greatest promos in the history of professional wrestling. The only issue was it was not a work, and in fact, it was a shoot. Now, I still think to this day they could have turned it into a work, and it would have been one of the best storylines, not just in AEW history, but in all of wrestling history. If you did the Elite versus CMFTR, it could have been gold and it could have printed AEW a lot of money. But hey, it didn't happen. That's not what we are going to talk about today. What we are going to talk about today is Tony Khan sitting in that spot next to CM Punk as he was going on that rant. What should Tony Khan have done? Some people might say that he should have fired CM Punk on the spot. Well, not literally on the spot, but like a week later or whatever. Because if he did that, well, then what would have happened a year later wouldn't have happened. And the difference between then and a year later was CM Punk looked a lot worse in that moment. It was public. CM Punk got so much criticism of fans. A year later, what happened was backstage, and we didn't see it for months later, and a lot of the CM Punk fans, they didn't see it, and therefore they defended it. CM Punk, to the fans, to the public, looked a lot more guilty at that time compared to when he was eventually fired. Another way of looking at it is it all worked out, because at the end of the day, they got AEW Collision. Would they have had AEW Collision without him? That's a good question to ask. I mean, there's certainly a lot of different ways this could have gone. Another perspective is by that moment, it was already too late. He should have put a stop to it the second CM Punk and Hangman Page went off script during that promo months before. Or was it just always going to implode no matter what CM Punk did? It's a question which has a million answers, but Clark, I want to start off today by asking you for your one.
So, obviously, this is the second most important event to happen in Chicago on September 4th, besides my birth. Easily. But as far as I'm concerned, I look at it like this. CM Punk said some stuff. I was at that show. It was the feeling coming out of the arena was not nearly what the feeling was on the flight home in the morning. And that's one of my most vivid memories of the event, is how quickly things turned. It really did put a damper, and it happened twice on big shows. What could have been done differently? That specific question, maybe cut the mic, step in the interview. But we also saw stepping in didn't necessarily work just a year later. Hindsight's always 2020, but if I'm putting myself back in 2022, right this second, the only difference is you don't let him talk and you get him treated for his torn tricep that we know happened. That's the solution. If that happens, a lot of things change. I don't know that it's necessarily for the better, because this was a ticking time bomb. We know that now. So in the context of what happened in that moment, absolutely, I think the move is you send CM Punk to go get treatment for his tricep and then have him come to the press conference. It's the only logical solution that I can truly think of that prevents this. It's a preventative measure. Because who is angrier than a guy that just, one, is frustrated at work and has a torn tricep, knows he's out for a long period of time, and is in pain on an adrenaline dump? You're not in a good mood. You're putting your talent in a position to fail in a press conference because you're not in the right mind space to field questions and answer them properly given your position within the company. You just handed the world title that night. You just won it in his hometown. And yes, he tore his tricep. That puts an even bigger. That's the veil to me that we don't usually talk about. This is a guy on an adrenaline dump with a significant injury making these statements. And that drastically, in my eyes, changes my perception of what he actually said. Because I'll tell you what, the last thing I want to do is answer a bunch of questions about work. If I've got a torn anything, I'm injured anywhere. And so to me, the only preventative measure that I could see to have not allowed this to happen is send him to get medical attention right away
Absolutely.
instead of waiting.
And you mentioned, of course, the torn tricep, which, like you said, it's an adrenaline rush. He's clearly in a lot of pain. That's a
When
good
the
point. And
dump is
his
worse, it gets more. So when you tear it, you have the rush. The adrenaline's
mm,
high. You don't. You may feel the pop. You may feel it, but the pain does not set in until the adrenaline starts to come down. So as he's eating Mindy's donuts with low blood sugar, his adrenaline being dumped, right? Because at this point you're exhausted from wrestling as long of a match as he has,
mm,
and he has a torn tricep. The pain is setting in throughout that moment. How quickly it happened after the main event. The adrenaline that was there when you're performing isn't anymore. Now you feel that injury. You didn't maybe you may have felt, the people talk about the pop or like the tear itself. You may feel that in the moment. But when it really hurts is about an hour later, 45 minutes later. That's when the pain sets in. That's when your body recognizes where the damage is and starts to send the nerve signals. And I'm only an amateur scientist, but I can just tell you, like, that is not a moment where you want to be answering questions, right?
yeah,
To
absolutely. I'm
anybody
only an
that's not
amateur scientist.
helping you with pain.
Yeah, no, I mean you're exactly bang on, but also another point talking about medical issues with him at that time. I mean, he took a lot of hits to the head during that match. He was bleeding from the head. He was covered in blood, right? We don't know, and we still don't know if he had a concussion in that moment. But the fact of the matter is, you probably didn't have enough time to do a proper concussion check on him between him being there and then going out and doing that interview. So
Very true.
that's another factor. They needed to put something in place. And that certainly shouldn't be kicking off the press conference with somebody who wrestled 2 minutes beforehand, which,
Right.
in fairness, is something which I think they have stopped since, because I haven't noticed that in a while, them doing it immediately after. Usually it's like whoever opened the show comes out first. But Chaos, what about you? What would you have done differently?
Uh, boy, it's a crazy situation. I mean, well, everyone seems to be blaming CM Punk, and all the hate has been aimed towards him. But at the end of the day, I think the person that should get the most hate or the most criticism should be the guy that runs the place, which was Tony Khan. I think if he actually grew a backbone and stopped treating his employees as as friendly people, as his friends, and treat them as actual like people that he's hiring. I don't think that would have ever have happened. I think that's and I feel like I understand that he was obviously hurt. Punk was obviously he was injured and all that stuff, but I think that's also what tipped him over. I think he obviously knew that he was hurt, and that probably frustrated him because you just made this comeback. This is just after you busted your leg, your foot. You come back and now you're immediately injured. You know he just knew internally uh that whatever plans were in set in stone is probably most likely scrapped, and he was probably just obviously frustrated, not just from the obviously on top of the adrenaline, on top of obviously someone must have said something on his way in the back and whatnot, and obviously there's all that stuff tipped him over. But yeah, I know for a fact that he would never try that if good old VKM was sitting next beside him, because he knows he just wouldn't try it. But I think that's why he just uh from the mannerisms and the person that TK is, he just thought, yeah, this guy ain't gonna fire me because at the end of the day, I'm his biggest straw. I'm the one that's putting butts in the seats, regardless of what the stats say and whatnot. And is I'm not gonna really get any repercussions from it. Obviously, later down the line, obviously, he kind of eventually did suffer the repercussions. But yeah, it was just all a bunch of things that just built up, and obviously just tipped him over, and he was just looking for any excuse to really like just set off and just keep him going. But yeah, it was the thing that I would change is if TK was actually a boss and not a friend. That's the only thing that really boils down to it. He was the actual person that could have easily stopped it cold as soon as you see CM Punk just ranting. You see that look in his eyes that he was in meltdown mode. Um, And yeah, he should have just nullified it. Probably shouldn't have let him set him out there, but obviously the process and everything was obviously different than how it is to now, like how it is now. In terms of injury protocols and all that stuff, it was kind of hazy back then. Let's be real, with previous injuries and whatnot. So they didn't really have a proper protocol. So yeah, now obviously I think they've kind of evened it out. But yeah, what I would have chosen, or what I wish would happen, is if he actually had a backbone, Tony Khan I'm talking about, and just nipped it in the bud, and then yeah, sort it out off like backstage, and we
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have this. So that's why I would change.
No doubt about that. And I mean, you said that about, Tony Khan stepping in and sorting it out. In my personal opinion, I think that's what he should have done the second that
Yeah.
Hangman Page went off script, and Punk clearly didn't like it, right? And hey, if for some reason he didn't know Punk didn't like that, well then you know that Punk didn't like it when a few weeks before this, Punk randomly called out Hangman Page for a match. At that point, you know there's clearly an issue because you've got two talents going off scripts. Sort it out. He shouldn't have gotten to the point where it happened at all. It shouldn't have happened there. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think you've got to blame the management.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I'm saying. TK is the one to blame because like he had the signs were there, like you said. That's a good point. The signs were there. He should have like say, look, nip it, look, sort it out. We have like a sit down or anything. If you keep on doing this, I'm gonna scrap everything, or I'm just gonna mess everything up. But he has no backbone. He has to rely on Brian Danielson and this disciplinary committee, and it's just like it's not good.
I think that's fair when it comes to the Tony Khan part of it, but it was a lot of adults acting like children on the same night. It wasn't just Punk. True. It was a lot of adults acting like schoolyard, right? Like BS, like drama, like lunch table
who's the
drama.
head teacher?
No, absolutely, right. And you got to have your hand on the pulse of that. I agree. The fact that it happened twice is where it's like, you're kidding. But if we're only speaking on the context of 2022, I do find it fathomable that he's in that moment looking like, hey, we just strapped the rocket ship to CM Punk's back. I don't want to now tell him to shut up. And you're not necessarily, it is a big ask to be like, you got to be.
He's paying him. Like,
no, he's paying him, but it's a big ask to not trust him in that moment. Now, towards the end or the middle of it, yes, for sure, right? But in the beginning, as it's starting, you don't know where he's going. You're like, maybe he's in character, he's doing a bit, whatever it may be. Right, you just trusted this guy with your world title, in that moment in and of itself, and so I am inclined to give, because I hear where you're coming from. I think Tony Khan, if you're gonna, one thing that could have been done, it was either him. I presented the medical thing, but just putting the hammer down and saying shut up, right? Mm-hmm. Like that is the answer. But I also am inclined to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt on like, in that very moment, you're in Punk's hometown. He's the key draw. He filled the building. You strap the rocket ship to his back. You're on the way to the start of Collision and all of that. And you know that those talks are in the works and whatnot. To then cut off Punk is a big ask there. Yeah. Like, it's like, now, should he have done it? Probably, but it's like,
it was a difficult situation, and I always say this. I actually genuinely, and I think I'm one of the only people who say it, I feel for Tony Khan in this situation, right? Because he's done a lot of amazing things in his life. What he's never properly done was run a company. Well, before this, not properly, he hadn't done was run a company with, individuals who, are very high on adrenaline at certain moments, because of course it's a very physical business. And you're going to have these big personalities. And I think in that moment, there's an image of Tony Khan sitting there next to Punk and him just looking at Punk just with like his face, and he's so depressed. You can just tell the fact that he had so much regret about how he handled this situation, I think.
So uncomfortable, to say the least. Just he
don't know what to do.
Very uncomfortable. Yeah. And in hindsight, I have a lot more fun with this subject than I did at the time. I'll tell you that.
Oh, yeah. We know it all worked out now. AEW's fine. CM Punk's fine.
Everybody's all good.
Everyone's a lot happier than they were at the time. But I mean, oh, gosh. I mean, it is just... I said it at the start. I'll say it again. I'll continue to watch it, right? Especially now, because it's not like it's killed either one of them. But
No.
it was just such a well-delivered promo by CM Punk. It was real, but it was well-delivered and
From the heart.
thoroughly
From
entertaining.
the heart, it was one of the greatest promos. It's up there obviously it's up there with the pipe bomb. It's
It's
and yeah, he just
hysterical.
spoke from the
Yeah.
heart. He spoke from the
Flirt
heart
with
with the pipe bomb.
children.
He spoke from the heart here. So